She was only 2 years old, and for 31 days, no one reported her missing. Not her mother, not her family, no one. Some stories begin with the disappearance, but this one begins with silence. What happened to Caylee Anthony still echoes in America's memory. A missing child, a mother's silence. The Caylee Anthony mystery. There are missing child cases that shake a neighborhood, and then there are cases that shake a nation. But none felt as unreal or as impossible as this one. A 2-year-old girl vanishes, her mother goes out partying, and for 31 days, not a single alarm is raised. 31 days, 31 nights, not one call for help. This is the story of Caylee Anthony, and the mother who claimed she loved her until every echo suggested otherwise. In Orlando, Florida, the Anthony home sat in a typical suburban neighborhood where the streets were quiet and families often knew one another. The house itself was modest, with a neat yard and a backyard pool that had been part of many summer afternoons. Inside lived 3 adults and 1 small child: grandparents Cindy and George, their daughter Casey, and Casey's young daughter, Caylee Marie. Caylee was 2 years old, bright and expressive. She moved easily from room to room, carrying toys, repeating new words, and pointing toward things she wanted. She enjoyed picture books, playing outside, and being held by her grandfather when they walked through the neighborhood. Her grandparents described her as curious and talkative for her age. Casey was 22, sociable and friendly, known among friends for her outgoing personality. She often spoke about work and responsibilities, though her schedule was unclear to some who knew her. In family photos, she is seen smiling beside her daughter, their faces close, both looking directly into the camera. Cindy and George played a major part in raising Caylee. Cindy handled daily routines, meals, outfits, naps, while George took on quieter moments such as cartoons in the morning, or short walks when the weather was calm. Most days in the house revolved around the habits of a toddler, and the presence of 3 adults made those routines predictable. There were disagreements too. Arguments about money, chores, and decisions surfaced from time to time, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet. But nothing felt unusual enough to stand out. These moments had become part of the family's normal rhythm, blending into the background of everyday life. From the outside, the home looked stable, a place shaped by schedules, familiar sounds, and the steady routines of raising a young child. This is where her story stopped making sense. June 15th, 2008 was a warm Sunday, the kind of quiet day that settled naturally into the family's routine. Cindy spent part of the afternoon outside with Caylee, taking her into the backyard pool. It was something they did often: short swims in the shallow end, sunlight on the water, and the comfort of familiar surroundings. Photos taken that day show Cindy holding her granddaughter in the pool. Caylee's hair is wet, her expression relaxed, the kind of small moment families save without imagining its future significance. These images later became the last clear photographs of her alive. Inside the house, the day moved at an easy pace. Meals were prepared, towels were laid out to dry, and the evening settled in the same way many others had. Nothing unusual happened. No one noted anything out of place. It was simply a summer day shared between a grandmother and her granddaughter. The rhythms of the house remained steady through the evening. Casey came and went, her schedule unclear as it often was, but nothing in her behavior suggested concern or urgency. The family ended the night believing the next morning would unfold like any other. June 15th would later be studied closely, its photos, its timeline, the quiet moments captured in memory. At the time, though, it felt ordinary, unremarkable, and peaceful. It was the final day anyone in the Anthony family would remember seeing Caylee alive. June 16, 2008 began quietly inside the Anthony home. The sun came in through the blinds the way it usually did in early summer, and the house moved through its normal morning routine. There were small sounds, footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, the TV playing softly in another room. Sometime that morning, Casey left the house with Caylee. No one in the family saw exactly when they walked out or where they were heading. The moment wasn't marked by anything unusual, and the day didn't stand out to anyone at the time. It felt like many mornings before it, simple, ordinary, and unremarkable. What happened after they left is unclear. There are no confirmed sightings of the two together. No neighbors reported seeing them. No store cameras captured them. The details of the day exist only through phone records and movement patterns that show Casey driving to different areas of Orlando, but nothing that explains what she was doing or where Caylee was during those hours. Throughout the afternoon, Casey spoke briefly with friends by text. Her tone seemed normal. No urgency, no mention of a problem, no sign that anything had changed. She made casual plans, talked about meeting up later, and kept conversations short. The evening passed without anything that drew attention. Casey didn't return home with her daughter. She didn't call her parents to check in. She didn't explain where Caylee would be spending the night. In the Anthony household, June 16th ended the same way it began, quietly, without awareness that it would become the most scrutinized day of the entire investigation. It was the last day anyone could say with certainty that Caylee Marie Anthony was alive. In the days following June 16th, the rhythm inside the Anthony home began to shift, though no one immediately recognized the change. Casey didn't return with Caylee, and when Cindy asked where her granddaughter was, the answer was always simple and confident. Caylee was with the nanny, a woman Casey called Zanny. Zanny had been mentioned before, but no one in the family had ever met her. Casey described her as someone who watched Caylee during long work shifts, someone reliable, someone she trusted. The explanations sounded practiced, almost routine, and for a time, they quieted the questions. During those weeks, Casey spent most of her nights away from home. She stayed at her boyfriend Tony's apartment, spent time with friends, and appeared in photos taken at clubs and parties. In the images, she is smiling, posing with friends, her demeanor light and relaxed. People around her assumed Caylee was being cared for elsewhere. Phone records from this period show Casey moving through different parts of Orlando, visiting friends, stopping at stores, driving across town. None of these movements indicated urgency or worry. Her conversations were casual, focused on everyday topics without any mention of a missing child. At the Anthony home, Cindy and George grew uneasy. They asked to speak to Caylee, to see her, to have her stay overnight as she often had before. Casey always had explanations ready. Caylee was napping, they were out, plans had changed, the nanny had taken them somewhere new. Each answer postponed the next question. One detail from this period later became important. Casey's white Pontiac Sunfire had been abandoned and towed from a parking lot. When Cindy recovered the car, she noticed a strong odor inside the trunk. The smell unsettled her, but at the time, she didn't know what to make of it. Caylee brushed it off, saying it was just old trash that had been left too long in the heat. 31 days passed this way, without Caylee being seen by family, friends, or anyone who knew her. The explanations continued, casual and steady, until the point Cindy could no longer quiet her own concern. This 31-day stretch became the gap the entire investigation would try to understand, a period filled with movement, conversations, and daily life, but missing the one thing that mattered most. By mid-July, the tension inside the Anthony home had grown into something Cindy could no longer ignore. Days had passed, then weeks, and every request to see Caylee had been met with another explanation, another change in plans, another reason why she wasn't available. The answers no longer felt simple, they felt rehearsed. On July 15th, the strain reached a point where Cindy decided to act. Earlier that day, she had recovered Casey's abandoned car from the tow yard. The moment she opened the door, she noticed the smell again, sharp, unfamiliar, and strong enough to unsettle her. She mentioned it to family members, her worry now visible instead of held back. That evening, Cindy made the first of 3 calls to 911. In the initial call, she reported a theft, money missing from the home, her daughter's car being taken without permission. Her voice was firm but controlled, focused on practical details rather than emotion. Minutes later, she called again. This time, her tone shifted. Cindy said her granddaughter hadn't been seen for a month. The sentence came out quickly, almost as if she was hearing it clearly for the first time as she spoke it. The dispatcher asked questions, and Cindy tried to provide what she knew, but there was little she could say with certainty. The third call was different. Her voice shook. The smell from the car, something she couldn't explain, pressed into the conversation. She said she felt something was terribly wrong. The dispatcher asked whether she believed a crime had occurred. Cindy couldn't answer directly. She could only repeat that something didn't feel right. Officers were sent to the Anthony home. They listened as Cindy tried to recount the last month, her words moving between confusion, frustration, and fear. Caylee stood nearby, calm and composed, answering questions with steady confidence. She repeated the same explanation. Caylee was with the nanny. She said she'd been trying to reach her. She said it wasn't unusual. The officers took notes, asked for addresses, and prepared to follow up. Nothing in those first moments revealed the complexity of what they were about to uncover. But the calls marked the end of the 31 days of silence. From this point forward, the search for Caylee became official. When officers arrived at the Anthony home on the night of July 15th, they began with basic questions. When Caylee was last seen, who had been caring for her, and why no report had been filed earlier. Caylee stood in the living room and repeated the same explanation she'd given her family. Caylee was with the nanny. Her tone was steady, her sentences smooth, as if she had practiced the details many times before. The name she gave was familiar from earlier conversations, Zanny, short for Zenaida. Caylee said she'd been leaving Caylee with her for more than a year. She described an apartment complex, a phone number, and a routine in which she dropped off her daughter each morning before heading to work. To the officers, the structure of the story sounded complete, but the details felt thin. They asked for the nanny's address, and Caylee provided one. Officers drove there immediately. The door was locked. No lights were on. Neighbors said no one by that name had ever lived in the building. The unit appeared vacant. When they returned with this information, Caylee did not seem surprised. She offered another location, another address she said the nanny sometimes used. Officers checked that one as well. It also led nowhere. Through the night, they asked for timelines, phone numbers, and specific places Caylee claimed to have been. Her answers shifted slightly each time, small adjustments that made the story harder to follow. She said she had been trying to reach the nanny but could not get through. She said she had her own reasons for not contacting the police sooner. Officers took notes, marking contradictions as they appeared. What stood out most in those first hours was not a dramatic admission or an emotional breakdown. It was the calmness with which Caylee spoke, even as every detail she provided began to dissolve under basic verification. By the end of the night, one thing was clear. The nanny Caylee described did not appear to exist, and the search for Caylee would need to begin from the ground up, without the narrative Caylee had built for 31 days. The story had begun with a lie, but now the lie was collapsing. In the space of a single night, the woman who claimed to have answers was left with nothing but contradictions. No nanny, no location, no explanation, only a missing child, and a mother whose story no longer existed on solid ground. In part 2, the investigation turns inward. Forensic evidence begins to speak. The nation starts to watch. And the truth, whatever it is, can no longer stay buried. Next on True Echoes. The search for Caylee had barely begun, but the lies were already catching up. In part 2, we follow what silence turned into, the evidence, the contradictions, and the moments that pushed a nation to its breaking point. The story continues in part 2, where answers finally surface and truths collide. Part 2, the truth coming soon on True Echoes. Not every truth screams. Some hide in contradictions. Which moment made you stop and question everything? What detail changed your perspective tonight? Share your thoughts. Your voice becomes part of the echo. To be continued. And step into the echoes of truth.